In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a website with a sidebar navigation menu that uses modern icons, drop-down menus, smooth transitions, and a responsive CSS grid layout. This project is the perfect learning opportunity to learn more about grid, flexbox, positions, transitions, overflow behavior, and responsive web design in general. Because on smartphone screens, we will turn everything into a bottom navigation bar. Here we will face some extra hard challenges. We're going to do all of that towards the end of the video, so stick around to learn how to make all of this responsive. My name is Fabian and this is Coding to Go, the channel where you learn the most relevant coding concepts in just a few minutes. As always, we start with our HTML code. Create a new file, index.html, and create some boilerplate code. The title of this tab is Home. Now we have to define the elements that make up our layout. Step 1. Make sure your HTML code consists of two semantic elements, the nav and the main tag. The main tag will hold everything that you put on your website, so just add some example content for now. I created a few div containers, added some h2 headings, and generated some lorem ipsum text. The nav tag will receive an ID, sidebar. One could argue that using the aside tag would be more fitting for a sidebar, but since our sidebar serves as the main navigation of this website, the nav tag will be a better choice. If, however, you have both a horizontal navbar and a sidebar, then you would use the aside tag for the sidebar. Now here we want to have an unordered list, where each list item will be an anchor tag. Use the href attribute to specify the domain that we want to link to. We have index.html for our current website, which is why I also add the class active. This is important because we can use this active class later to highlight the current website in the sidebar, so that the users always know where they are. But we're going to do that later. Let's quickly reference the other pages as well. We have dashboard.html, calendar.html, and profile.html. Each link is its own list item. These links will all have two child elements, an icon and a span. The span will just be the normal text content, like home, dashboard, calendar, and profile. The icons will be added above each span using an SVG tag. You can get SVG icons completely for free at fonts.google.com/icons. Simply search for the icon you want and download as SVG. I will get all of these icons that you see here. And this is really what makes the design work so well. These modern icons can make all the difference and give your website a more modern look. They're also going to be very important in the collapsed version of the sidebar, since this is the only thing that the user will see. Once we have the icons in our project folder, open them in VS Code to get the SVG element that is stored inside. Copy the entire SVG element and paste it into the link directly above the span element. This is the SVG code for the home icon. Now repeat this process for the dashboard, calendar, and profile. Simply copy the entire SVG element for the respective icon and paste it inside the link. Make sure to use the fitting icon for each navigation element. Of course, if your website has different pages and links, then you would use different icons for it. If Google Fonts does not have the right icons for you, then you might also check out simpleicons.org. There you can find the SVG icons for every company logo, in case you need that. Once we got every link with an icon and a span, we can continue with the drop-down menus. You see, right now I only took care of the links that don't have a drop-down menu: home, dashboard, calendar, and profile. But the create button and the to-do list buttons will have a sub-menu so that we can click on more options. So let's create another li element, and instead of a link, we create a button. It has the class drop-down button. This one will contain a span, create, and choose a fitting SVG icon. Also, after the span, we add another icon, which indicates that this is a dropdown. Now, directly below the button, still within the same list item, we create an unordered list. This is our submenu, which contains list items with anchor tags. And these anchor tags are the actual links of our dropdown menu. Let's call them folder, document, and project. Also, these could be buttons or anything else. We just have to make sure to style them properly in CSS. I'm just going to leave a placeholder for now. Now this is the HTML code for one drop-down menu. We have a button and a UL. We're going to make the button look exactly like a normal LI element. And trust me, creating the CSS code for the dropdown was a lot of fun. I had to try out so many different ways to make the transition work properly, since transitioning to hide auto in CSS is quite a challenge. I'm really excited to show you the solution I found, but we're going to do this later. For now, let's focus on the HTML code again. I'm going to copy the entire list item to create another drop-down menu. This one is called to-do lists. I replace the SVG icon and change the content of our submenu. This time we have 5 list items. These could be example to-do lists that the user already created. You would probably generate them dynamically in your front-end framework. And now the HTML code is almost complete. We just need one more thing. At the beginning of our URL, we add another list item for our logo. This would be your company name. I'm just going to put coding to go. We also add a button that has the ID toggle button. This will be the button that opens and closes the sidebar. So let's add the fitting icon, which is the double left arrow. You could also use the menu icon if you prefer. Alright, and that's it. Let's get to the interesting part, the CSS code. We want to turn this ugly looking HTML page into a responsive animated website, where the sidebar is on the left side and the main content is on the right side. Make sure to embed the CSS file properly and create the file in our project folder, style.css. The first thing I always do is to import the font family Poppins. This is totally optional, but I just love that font. Then we address the root element to define our color palette using CSS variables. Then I apply some very basic styles for the website. This will give us a clean starting point that we can work with. We have no annoying predefined margins and paddings, a nice font family and line height, and the body height is set up properly for both desktop and device-specific requirements. Nothing too complicated. The next step is going to be very important. Apply display grid so that we can define the grid layout for this website. Our grid layout should have 2 columns, so we use grid template columns. The first column should have an automatic size, so just write auto. And the second column is meant for the rest of the website. It's just one fraction. One fraction will make all of this responsive. This means the sidebar will only be as big as it needs to be. It's scaled automatically. Whereas the main content of the website will have a responsive size of one fraction, which will allow it to grow and shrink depending on how much space the device offers. Before we get to the sidebar, let's apply some basic styles to the main content of the website. I'm going to style the containers and their content to make things look a little better. This is also very optional. Now let's finally take care of the sidebar. Box sizing border box and height of 100 viewport height to make it stretch the entire height. The width is 250 pixels, and we apply a bit of padding. 5 pixels top and bottom and 1 EM left and right. The background color should be our variable base color. And we have a border right of 1 pixels solid line color. Let's quickly select the sidebar's UL to apply list style none. This will remove the bullet points. The first list item in our unordered list uses a flexbox layout with flex end to have it oriented on the right side. We have a margin bottom and the logo will be styled with a bolder font weight, let's say 600. We also want to style the active list item. Remember, this is the class we apply to the li which holds the current website link. Depending on where we are on the website, a different link will be highlighted using this class. Here I want to style the anchor tag. Let's change the text color and fill color of the SVGs. Both of these will be colored using the accent color variable. On the website, the home link should now be highlighted, because this is our current website link. The next styles are meant for quite a few elements. The sidebar anchor tags, the sidebar drop-down button, and the logo. They all share the same styles because we want to have a consistent CSS layout. So we can style them in one single CSS rule, by just writing commas between the selectors. They all have a border radius and padding. Text decoration none, color is our text color variable, and it uses display flags and align items center to center the content vertically. We have a gap of 1 EM to control the distance between the icons and the text. Since the drop-down button is not an anchor tag, we need a few additional styles so that they all look the same. Now, one important aspect I want to take care of next is the scroll behavior. You see, when we have a lot of content on the website, which is why I put all of this content here, then we can usually scroll down. In this case, I want the sidebar to stay in place. Only the main content should be scrollable. Many people would use position fixed in this case, since this allows us to fixate the position of the sidebar. But using fixed positioning will put the sidebar onto another stacking context, which means that it will be isolated from the others. And this kind of breaks the grid layout. The element won't get recognized in the body, which is why the value of auto for the first column will be 0 pixels wide. Only the main content will stretch the entire width. So instead of position fixed, we can use position sticky. We also need a top of 0 and align self start. This will set up the sticking point of the sidebar, which is the top edge of our viewport. In this way, our space of 250 pixels will be reserved in the grid, and when we scroll the element, it will follow us perfectly. Let's quickly select all the SVGs inside the sidebar. Here, we want to apply a flex shrink of 0. This will prevent any distortion in size. And we use the fill property to apply the text color. Now let's style the spans. We have spans inside the anchor tags and spans inside the dropdown buttons. We always have to style these together. Here we want to apply a flex grow of 1. Remember, the spans hold the actual tags of the links and dropdown buttons. By applying flex grow of 1, we can make sure that they fill out their parent element. This will push the other elements to the edges, like the dropdown SVG for example. Now this icon will always be on the right side. If we don't have flex grow applied, then this icon will just be wherever the text ends. And this will be different every time depending on how long the word is. So to have this consistent, make sure the text has a flex grow of 1. Let's also apply a hover effect to our links and dropdown buttons. Here I want to change the background color and apply the hover color variable. The next thing I want to show you is one of the coolest things I've learned recently. The opening mechanism of how to open and close the sidebar with a CSS transition. Don't get me wrong, I did know how to do this earlier, but not with a transition. You see, when we want to open and close a dropdown, then we can do this with display none or changing the height from height 0 to height auto. But in all of these cases, we cannot put a transition on it, because these are the things that don't work in CSS. But there's a way of how we can do this with a grid layout, because on grid layouts, transitions do work. The first thing I tried was to use display none, because this would be the simplest way to do this. So we select the sidebar submenu and apply display none. Now the submenu is gone. Pretty simple. Then we style the sidebar submenu that has the class show. Here we apply display block, just like that. We're going to add and remove this class using JavaScript. But for now we can just try out what happens if I add the class manually to the element. So in the browser we inspect the page and find one of the drop-down menus. Here I simply apply the class show on the UL. We can see adding and removing this class will open and close the drop-down menu. But that is not working the way I want it. There is no transition, it simply jumps open. And even if I go to the CSS code and apply a transition of 300 milliseconds ease in out, then it will have no effect. As we can see, transitioning from display none is not possible. Another option would be to try using overflowing and height to open and close the menu. Instead of display none, we apply overflow hidden, and then use height 0 pixels. This will hide the submenu too, because it has no height. And now when the show class is applied, we want to set the height back to auto. The value auto will make it assume the height it needs to display its content properly. So sometimes we have 5 list items in the submenu and sometimes only 3. Height auto will adjust automatically. But as we can see, the transition is still not kicking in, because this is the next problem I faced. We cannot animate to height auto. But just to show you this, if the value was anything other than auto, then the transition will work. So if I just hardcode 300 pixels instead of auto, and then try the same thing. Now the transition is working perfectly. We can see opening and closing will be animated in the browser. So in theory, this would be possible if we just know the value that we need. 300 pixels is not a good choice, because what happens if we have 10 list items or only 2? The value should be different every time. In other words, it should be automatic to handle a varying amount of child elements. But as I already told you, height auto doesn't work. So this option doesn't work either. So instead, let's apply the last thing I tried, which actually worked. We're going to use CSS grid. Remove the styles we tried, but keep the transition property. Instead, we apply display grid. Our grid should handle only one child element. So let's go to the HTML code and create a div container around the list items in the submenu. So we create a div and put the list items inside. Do the same thing for the other submenu too. Simply wrap a div container around the child elements. Then, in our CSS code, this div container will have an overflow hidden. Why? Because overflow hidden will hide child elements that don't fit in the container. If the container gets too small, the child elements will be hidden. But how do we make the container small enough to hide everything without using the height property, which we know doesn't work? The solution is to control the height of the grid row, and we can do this using grid template rows. Here we apply 0 fractions. So our grid has only one row, which is 0 fractions tall, meaning it has no height, but we're not using height. When we want to show the submenu, we override this property. Select grid template rows, and the value is going to be 1 fraction. Remember, 1 fraction is a responsive unit that will adjust automatically, which in this case is the same as height auto. But remember, we're not using height auto because that doesn't work. And now if we try in the browser to apply and remove the class show, the transition property will work perfectly. The submenu is opening and closing perfectly. We have an animated drop-down menu. Great. Now we need to write some JavaScript code to handle the show class. Currently, I'm doing this manually in the developer tools, but we do have a button for this. Before we move on to the JavaScript part, I want to mention that if you found the CSS code in this video a bit too advanced and didn't fully understand everything, then I recommend to focus on mastering the fundamentals of HTML and CSS first. A solid foundation is crucial for future learning. And if you like the way we teach things on this channel and you want to strengthen your HTML and CSS skills, then check out our Udemy course. It's designed to be as beginner-friendly as possible while respecting your time with a productive teaching approach. You can get the course right now using the first link in the video description. But now, let's move on to the JavaScript part. Let's use the button to open and close the drop-down menu. In the HTML code, let's go to the button that is above the submenu. Here we use the onClick attribute to call a function. The function is called when the button is clicked. We are going to call toggle submenu. And now, very importantly, in the parentheses, we pass this as an argument. In this case, the this keyword will return the current HTML element where it is called, and that would be the button. We need this information so that we know which of our buttons has been pressed. Since we have multiple dropdowns, this button should open the submenu that is right next to it, and not the other one. On the other dropdown, we do the same thing. Go to the button and use the onClick attribute to call the function toggle submenu. And as the argument, we pass this again. Because now this is going to be this button. I know that talking about this in English is quite a challenge, but essentially the keyword will return the current HTML element so that we always know which button has been pressed. Now let's write the JavaScript code to define what should happen when these buttons are clicked. In the HTML head, I embed the script tag for our JavaScript file, app.js. We also need to use the defer attribute, so that the JavaScript code will wait for the HTML code to finish loading. We don't want to run into the errors that happen when we execute JavaScript code before our website is even there. In the JavaScript file, we now create the function toggle submenu. It has the parameter button, which is the current button that is passed when we call the function using the this keyword. Since we have the current button in this variable, we can access its next element sibling, which is the submenu. Remember, in our HTML code, the button and the submenu are direct sibling elements. They are on the same hierarchy level within the same li element. And now, since we are in the submenu, we can access the class list and toggle the class show, which has the CSS logic to show and hide the dropdown using grid template rows. And this will already open and close the dropdown using simple JavaScript code. And to have a better user experience, I would also recommend to rotate the SVG icon of this button. The arrow should point up when the menu is opened. To do that, let's address the button's class list and toggle the class rotate. Now we go to the CSS code and define the meaning of this class. The button, where the rotate class is applied, probably has an SVG element inside. And since it has multiple SVGs, we want to select the last child. We only want to rotate the arrow and not the create icon. Here, simply rotate by 180 degrees. And that will already rotate the icon on click. Pretty cool. And we can even go a step further and select the drop-down button SVG to apply a transition. This transition will make the rotating actually visible. We can also rotate it by negative 180 degrees to make the arrow go the other way around. Currently, our sidebar is far from perfect. Let's quickly apply a few last-minute styles to finish up the design before we write the JavaScript code, which is the most important aspect of this video. So bear with me to learn how to make this sidebar collapsible. First, let's finally address the anchor tags in the submenu and apply a padding left of 2 em. This has been annoying me for a long time now. Now the links in the submenu finally have a proper indentation. Next, style the toggle button, which is in desperate need of some styling. These styles will make the button unnoticeable and let the SVG icon do the work. And a little foreshadowing here, address the SVG icon to apply a transition for the rotating, because later we're going to rotate this icon too when we open and close the sidebar. So we can already apply a transition for later. On hover, the toggle button will change its background color. And now everything should look perfect. Let's take care of the JavaScript code. First, let's go to the toggle button in the HTML code and apply the onClick function. Toggle sidebar. This time we don't pass the this keyword. Instead, get the toggle button using its ID, toggle button. We store it into a variable because we need this on multiple occasions. We also need the sidebar, and use document.getElementID to get the sidebar into the variable. Let's define the function toggle sidebar, which is called when the button is clicked. Here I access the sidebar.classList and toggle the class close. I also access the toggle_button.classList and toggle the class rotate. The rotate class should already work, since we did that earlier with the dropdown button too. So clicking on the button in the browser will rotate the icon perfectly. But the class that closes the sidebar doesn't exist yet. So in CSS, we go all the way up where we have the styles for the sidebar. We apply a transition of 300 milliseconds ease in out to close it smoothly with a transition. Directly below, we choose the styles for the sidebar that has the class close. Again, make sure to not have a space between the two. Here, I want to set the padding to only 5 pixels because it should be a lot smaller. And the width is going to be 60 pixels, so it's going to be much smaller. Let's try it out in the browser. We can see the sidebar will close on click. But we do have a problem. The content is overflowing. And what do we do with overflowing content? We just hide it with overflow hidden. And this will hide the content. Pretty cool. But one small bug I'm seeing here is during the closing transition, we can see that the text for the to-do list is sort of wrapping weirdly. That is because it tries to rearrange the words so that they fit better in a smaller sidebar. Since we are making the element too small to display its content, the text starts to wrap. So in CSS, simply apply text wrap, no wrap. And this should prevent the text wrapping. Now on the surface, this project seems complete. But there is more work to be done, because there are a few bugs we need to take care of. For example, what happens when we access one of the dropdowns when the sidebar is collapsed? Oof, this does not look good. We are accessing the dropdown in a closed sidebar. As a user, I would expect that in this case, the sidebar should open too. So let's fix this in JavaScript. Inside the function that handles the submenu, we need to ask about the state of the entire sidebar. Is it closed or opened? So let's check. If the sidebar.classList.contains the class close, then we know that the sidebar is closed. In that case, we need to open it by toggling the close class again. We also need to toggle the rotate class on the toggle button, because this one should always rotate whenever we toggle the sidebar. Alright, and now in the browser, that should fix the first bug. When we open the dropdown in the collapsed sidebar, the sidebar opens too. But we also have to fix the exact opposite case. What if the dropdown is opened and then we close the sidebar? Then the dropdown should close too. The dropdown should only really be opened when the sidebar is open too. Let's go to the JavaScript code where we toggle the sidebar. Here, we first need to get all the opened dropdowns and then close them. Let's access the sidebar and get all the elements by their class name, show. This is now an HTML collection containing all the dropdowns that are opened. I'm doing it this way because we might have many different dropdowns that can be opened or closed at any given time. I want to make sure to have all the opened dropdowns in this HTML collection. But I also have to turn this into an array so that I can work with it. Let's call array.from and then put the entire thing inside. These are now the opened dropdowns in the form of an array. Now we can call a for each loop to iterate over the array. For each UL, we want to execute the following JavaScript code: ul.classList.remove show and ul.previousElementSibling, which is the dropdown button, .classList.remove rotate. So this will rotate back the arrow button for every dropdown. And that should already do the trick. The dropdowns are now behaving exactly how we would expect it from a collapsible sidebar menu. Now let's make this website responsive. You see, on smartphone screens, we cannot afford having a big grid like this, with a sidebar on the left side and the main content on the right side, because the main content will have almost no space. Instead, let's turn the sidebar into a bottom navigation bar, as this is what smartphone users usually expect. The bottom navigation bar should be scrollable in case we have too many links, and the drop-down menus need to be changed completely. Now they basically drop up into a second navbar, which is of course also scrollable. So let's do all of that inside a media query. That will make sure that everything we write from now on does only affect devices that are smaller than 800 pixels. The body will have a grid template columns of 1 fraction. So instead of 2 columns, we only have 1 column for the main content. The main tag will get a padding top of 2 em, padding right of 1 em, padding bottom of 60 pixels, and padding left of 1 em. The padding bottom of 60 pixels will reserve the space for the bottom navbar, which will be 60 pixels tall. So let's address the sidebar and apply the height of 60 pixels and width of 100%. We don't need a border right anymore and instead apply a border top. We have no padding and use position fixed to put it onto another stacking context. Here we have to unset the top property that we used earlier so that we can apply bottom 0. because the navbar should be at the bottom of the viewport. By now, our navbar should look pretty crowded. So let's remove a few elements that should not appear in our bottom navigation. We do this by simply applying display none and address all of the elements that we don't want to have. We hide them all at once using display none. I want to remove the spans inside the list items, because we don't need the text. The icons will suffice. Then I also remove the UL, LI, first child, which is the logo and the toggle button. These are the first two elements in the first list item. And we also remove the dropdown button SVG, last child. This is the arrow down icon next to the dropdowns. After having removed all of these elements, things should be a lot simpler. Let's quickly style the UL to rearrange the grid layout. First apply padding 0 and display grid. Here we want to apply grid auto columns 60 pixels and grid auto flow column. These two lines of code will make sure that we are using an automatic grid, where every grid item will be placed in a new column, to have them side by side. Normally, when grid auto flow is set to row, which is the default value, then every new element will be placed in a new row. By applying grid auto flow column, the grid will always create a new column. And we apply grid auto columns 60 pixels so that every automatically created column is 60 pixels wide, which is the space I want for every icon. I use align item center to center them vertically and use overflow X auto to make this container scrollable in case we have too many links and they don't fit all at once. The UL list items will assume a height of 100%. And the next thing we style will be the UL anchor tags and the UL dropdown buttons. Remember, we always style those together so that the links and the dropdown buttons look the same. They have a height and width of 60 pixels, no padding, no border radius, and justify content centered to center them horizontally. Now they should be perfect squares. And that should already look pretty good for the navbar. But now we need to adjust the styles for the dropdown menus. They are totally not working right now. The create and the to-do list buttons will expand a dropdown menu below the navbar, so let's fix that by placing them above the navbar. Make the dropdowns drop up instead. For that, we need to select the UL list items submenu with the class show. So these are the styles for a dropdown that is open. Use position fixed, bottom 60 pixels and left 0. This will place it directly above the navbar. We have box sizing border box, height 60 pixels and width 100%. So these styles are pretty much the same we have for the navbar. Let's use a different background color and apply a border top. But now, instead of a grid, we use a simple flexbox layout with display flex and justify content center. This should place the links next to each other. And since it doesn't seem to work, let's address the list items and apply display inline flex. This way, the list items actually behave like we would expect it from a flexbox layout. We also need to address the direct child div, which is the wrapper that holds all the list items inside a submenu. This one needs an overflow X of auto. This will make the container scrollable on the horizontal axis. So if we have too many dropdown links, we can simply scroll within the container. Last but not least, let's fix the anchor tags. Use box sizing border box and padding 1 EM. We also need to reset the width using auto, because apparently we changed that sometime earlier. And justify content center will center it. And this looks pretty great. Would you look at that? This is exactly what I wanted for the smartphone users. But we still have one problem regarding the user experience on the smartphone. On the smartphone, when we open one dropdown and then open the other one, then both dropdowns are opened at the same time. So when I close one of them, the other one is still open and it looks completely weird, which is not optimal. Instead, we should only allow one dropdown to be opened at a time. So the moment we open another one, the first one should close. And luckily, we already have the code for that in our JavaScript file. Remember, here we are getting an array of all the opened dropdowns and iterate over them to close every single one of them. So for clean code reasons, let's put this into a separate function and call it close all submenus. Make sure to call this function exactly here where we took the code from, so that everything stays the same. But now we also want to call this function when we toggle a dropdown. Then all the other dropdowns should be closed, which is here. So let's call it here in the toggle submenu function. This will close the dropdown whenever we open another one, both in the desktop and the mobile version. But this will also cause a problem. We cannot close the current dropdown anymore because we are first closing every dropdown and then toggle it open again. To fix that, we need to check if the current dropdown is already opened or not, before we close all the submenus. Since this toggle submenu function is called in both instances, when we open and when we close the dropdown, it doesn't know if it really needs to close the current submenu. Currently, it just does it every time we click, which is unnecessary and causes the error. So, to check if the current submenu is opened, we use button.nextElementSibling.classList.contains show. Remember, the button contains the information what button has been clicked. Then we access the submenu, which is the next element sibling. Here we check if the classList.contains the show class, which will return either true or false. If it contains the show class, then we know that the dropdown is open. In that case, we don't want to close all submenus. So use the exclamation mark to negate the entire thing. We're asking if not button.nextElementSibling.classList.contains show. Then we do want to close all submenus. And this should do the trick. We can open and close dropdowns perfectly, and when we access another dropdown, the last one will be closed. Great. Now, the last thing to do would be to make the actual navigation work. Currently, nothing happens when we click on any of these links. This will depend entirely on your front-end framework and routing system you have. If you're using React.js, then you would render the main component with different routes. But in my case, where I just use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I would need to create an entire HTML page for every link of the sidebar. So we have dashboard.html, calendar.html, and so on. Choose the exact names that we referenced in the href attributes of the links. Then simply copy the entire HTML code into every HTML page. Now you can put on these pages whatever you want. I will simply change the headings and the title of the tab so that I know on which page I am. But the one thing that you should definitely take care of is the active class. Remember, the list item that has the class active will be highlighted in the sidebar. So on the dashboard HTML page, we need to remove this class from the home link and apply it on the list item for the dashboard. And then do that for every other page too. And when we have done that, we can access all of these pages and the current page will be highlighted perfectly. We now have a fully functioning, collapsible, animated and responsive sidebar navigation menu. If you made it this far into the video, then I would like to take the time and thank you for watching, and explain some benefits that you would get with our Coding Pro membership. When you are on the Coding to Go channel page, then you can click the Join button to become a member and support the work we do. For $4.99 per month, members will get access to the HTML and CSS Complete course, which is our entire Udemy course as a YouTube playlist. You will get a guaranteed answer in the YouTube comment section and nice little symbols next to your name to show off your loyalty to this channel. Your support would mean the world to us and will make it possible to keep posting videos for free on YouTube. So I would love to have you as a Coding Pro member. My name is Fabian and this was Coding to Go, and I will see you in the next video.